It says we're now live streaming.
We are live streaming.
Live.
Dr. Dan, this is my friend and co-teacher. We've had workshops together. Dr. Dan, Daniel Wilson Jr., he has an ambition to change the world, one heart at a time. He has a background in Tantra, yoga, shamanic energy medicine, integrative breath work, and Taoist inner alchemy qigong. He cultivates a practice in Annapolis, Maryland, and he has private clients, both men and women, and teaches workshops. And he's just written a book that is going to launch on May 1st called The Authentic Masculine.
Yeah, the manifesto for authentic masculinity.
Ooh, yes. And he offers men who wish to more fully embody their sacred masculine birthright as deeply conscious and sexually empowered community leaders. Beautiful. So, Dr. Dan, tell us about what is authentic masculinity to you.
Right. So the origin of this exploration of authentic masculinity really began with this current cultural dialogue that we have surrounding the toxic masculinity, and how, while that's a necessary conversation, I didn't feel really satiated by it. Like, the way that I felt was kind of like, well, if we're going to talk about what is wrong and what we don't want, then we might as well cultivate a conversation as well around what is right, or what is the highest potential, or what we do want and desire, if we actually want it to manifest and for things to change and evolve. So that's when I started really thinking about this. So if I had to define authentic masculinity just as a concept or an idea or way of being, it is a paradigm shift from domination over others to dominion within oneself. It is an exploration and an embodiment of how compassion can be powerful, how love can be fierce, how sexuality can be sacred. And it is about how we can wield our masculinity as a force for that love, for that compassion in the world, to be whole-souled kings, living soul-centric lives, sitting on the throne of our heart consciousness. And so when someone is pursuing that, they are creating that which is in the world to give value to other people, because it's not as if they're trying to put themselves on a pedestal as the king or whatever. They're acting out of benevolence for other people. And they realize that they have a purpose on the planet, which is to benefit all life that's around them. They recognize their place within the web of life, and they move towards their goals and cultivate their relationships as such in a balanced way. This, you could call it the divine masculine as well. I call it authentic to make it more accessible, if somebody had a more secular mind toward this. Somebody who walks this path also deeply serves the feminine, and they recognize the necessity and the value of the feminine in the world, and they recognize the feminine within themselves and the necessity to integrate and to balance all of these aspects of themselves. And so they wield their masculinity as a creative engine for good and for the benefit of all living beings. And I could, go on and on about that, but that's kind of it in its essence. And I decided to throw this into the field as a part of this greater conversation, because the men's movement's not really new, it's just evolving,
Yeah, and we need it. It's just so important. I feel like women have, in many ways, had with the women's rights movement, women kind of are further along in saying, no, we are not going to live that culturally conditioned life if it's not right for us. Like for me, I
Right.
do not live a culturally conditioned female life of 50 years ago or 70 years ago, but I'm much more normal. I mean, I'm never going to be that normal, but I'm much more like it's my lifestyle is celebrated, whereas 70 years ago it would have been much more. Right?
Exactly.
So women have already had their kind of like shake off, and I feel like the Me Too movement has sparked off the masculine. Like so many men now. I mean, I have several men on here just talking about this same kind of issue and bringing it in their own way because it's just so important for men to show up in a new way and understand what does it mean to be a man.
Exactly. And there's this schism that can be created when these conversations are had, where if all of these shadows are coming to the light, right, like women who have been abused, women who have suffered sexual trauma at the hands of men, then it that comes into question, you know, like what is embodied masculine sexuality? Like what does it mean for a man to wield his sexuality responsibly, for instance? And that, you know, that it's not that it's you were making a demon out of the penis, you know, or at least it shouldn't really
Definitely
be
not.
that way. But women, this is a truth that kind of needs to be talked about more and more, is that women want men to express their sexuality. They just want them to do it responsibly and with consciousness and presence, you know, with sensitivity, really. And that patriarchy, as you're talking about, you know, women have been coming out more and more and more out of the shackles of oppression. That patriarchy, as we talk about it, the suppression of the feminine across the board, is also something that's damaging to men who want to live whole-souled lives, because it's actually suppressing the feminine within them as well. And so
And
anything that's bad for women is bad for men too, at the level of soul.
and the patriarchy is not helping men be themselves. It's also
Correct.
just programming of men who, you know, it's you're supposed to. It's the patriarchy is also is all about saying like you need to be this so that certain a certain way of being can be in control. So it's really no better for men than it is for women, really.
Exactly.
I would ask you a question. I've had like already 5 questions. One of them was use the word dominion within. What does that mean? I like
Yeah.
don't know the word dominion, which is exciting. I like to learn new words. Like what does that really mean to you?
Right. Right. So if I am a dominion of this apartment right here, I live here, right? I know the nooks and the crannies. I know where things are. I feel at home, right? So if I have a dominion within myself, that means that I have an inner life. That means that I am accustomed to exploring the realms of soul, the realms of psyche, and I have a commitment to self-discovery, to knowing thyself. And so to have a dominion within oneself is really to take steps along the path of balancing wisdom, love, and power. It's really about channeling your energy consciously. And I try to articulate these things so that people can like understand the value of an inner life and the value of walking a spiritual path, right? And it's the masculine for so long has been go out and get shit done and make things happen. And it's like, yeah, that's all cool. Like you need to do that if you want to build a house or whatever, or, you know, create something out there in the world materially. But if we're not doing that from a place of alignment and sensitivity and connection and presence, we're going to do things for all the wrong reasons. So, a dominion within oneself is what I characterize as true strength and true power. We can, instead of domination over others, which has been the way of proving oneself, right? For way, way, way too long. You know, if I can wrestle this person to the ground, if I can make more money than so and so, then I will be someone. Rather than this kind of measuring of some of our worth intrinsically, internally, based upon who we actually are, authentically as a being. And so it's really about recognizing the full dimensionality of ourselves, such that we can recognize our own divinity, and from that place meet the rest of the world. Because then we're coming about it with a full recognition of who we are, and thus we can see the fullness of who other people are from that place as well. Respect would abound.
Natural gifts are coming out, the things that you're meant to be doing, other than the programming of you should be a doctor so that you can make lots of money. It would be like, no, I want to do this thing over here. So it's more, it's like just fully allowing your soul to come into the world and sort of.
Exactly.
And how does this relate with sexuality?
Right. So much of the, you know, if you think about hashtag Me Too, you think about, you're probably thinking about sexual abuse in some way. I mean, domestic violence is a part of it, you know, sure, but a lot of us are thinking about rape culture, for instance. So for someone to embody their masculinity consciously also means them recognizing that their sexuality is a sacred gift, that their sexuality is a creative energy. So it kind of brings into the question, like, what are we creating? And especially, what are we creating in our relationships? Our relationship with ourself, our relationship with our higher self, and our relationship to our beloved and to community, beloveds, you know, if that's your lifestyle as well. So somebody who is embodying their masculinity authentically is also recognizing their sexuality as that sacred creative gift to be channeled with responsibility. So they can take themselves upon the path of sexual self-mastery, which is something that I teach my clients, because we don't normally talk about the fullest sexual potential of men to control that energy within themselves and to have the kind of orgasmic potential as women. You know, a lot of people don't talk about this. Napoleon Hill had an entire chapter in Think and Grow Rich, one of the most best-selling books, you know, of all time, about sex transmutation. And this was written in the 1920s. And we're still not talking about the fact that that energy, so many people are wasting it effectively.
I was just talking to my mom about this morning, because we were talking about like someone who probably shouldn't have any more children. And my mom was like, yeah, you know, they need to get a vasectomy. And I was just like, you know, if we just taught our teenage boys about Tantra, about these Taoist and Tantric practices, we would end teenage, you know, unwanted pregnancies. And I am just, and my mom was like, she could not understand what I was talking about. She was like, no, that's like, people are baffled. Like, it's like mind blown, cannot believe that this is possible for men to control their ejaculation and use that energy for something that, if they want to make a baby, great, make a baby. But most of the time, you don't want to make a baby. It's like, even if you want babies, maybe you want two, that's
Right.
two times. The rest of the time, that energy can be used for creativity and for so many different things.
Right. Right. And this is a great part of our conversation to have, because the workshop that we taught was sex magic manifestation and tantric visioning. So it's perfect. And I mean, there's so many dimensions to this. There's one image that I really love when I think about this, because a big part of it, right, is that instead of the sexual energy, always going out through ejaculation, it's the path of least resistance, really, that it can be retrained to be recycled throughout the body. And so one image that I really love is the idea of like a fetus growing in the sixth and seventh chakras, or in the heart. So as the energy is drawn up, it's kind of like impregnating oneself with one's higher potential, and having the gestation of the higher self being nourished and nurtured through one's own practice of self-cultivation, which of course, can ripple outward into all parts of one's life. More material wealth, more a greater physical health. There's so many dimensions of life that this truly affects. I mean, if, like you were saying, a sperm and an egg are so powerful that they literally can create a new human life, then the energies behind that can give birth to so much in the context of our lives. And the horizons are limitless. Most men laugh at the idea of being able to have multiple ecstatic full-bodied orgasms, like they know some women to be capable of. But that's not what they see in pornography. It's just not.
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
And so what would you say for men who, I honestly, most men cannot understand this or believe it, like the vast majority, even like really men who are in many ways very switched on, and I don't want to be a sword conscious man, a little elitist, but you know what I mean. Like, still, when it comes to ejaculation control and multi-orgasmic bliss for men, this is really like a surprise, a shock, and a disbelief. So, for how would you begin? Like, how did you get on that journey of being able to experience that? What
Yeah.
steps that the men could take?
Right. I mean, my journey was complex. I was in college when I first heard about Muntak Chia and some of the Taoist techniques that were available. And I had heard about it, but I hadn't explored it. It was just something that like low key fascinated me that I hadn't investigated yet. And so I also, like had a really difficult experience in college where I had a really, like heart-wrenching breakup, and had a subsequent like addiction to study drugs like prescription amphetamines. And during kind of like the darker periods of that time, I was an insomniac. So I would, like sometimes like masturbate twice in a night to, like get tired enough to fall asleep. And sometimes that wouldn't even work. So, you only have to walk into your 9 a.m. lab class on Monday mornings enough times and not have any worthwhile thoughts about electromagnetism or what Galileo thought, to know, okay, I should probably change. And I remember looking at myself in the mirror one day and just really like knowing that I'm not really being who I truly am. And so when I leaned into then was a choice to live a more full, vital life, which brought me to breath work and the Wim Hof method and Tantra and Taoist inner alchemy. And that was an immensely healing process for me, whereupon I balanced my emotional body and really healed my relationship to my sexuality to the point where I was having experiences that I'd never had in my life before. And so it really brought me through. What's that?
Like what? Like what?
Say,
Like you're feeling more pleasure in your body?
Yeah, I was honoring my sexuality as an energy, and I was feeling it nourish me in the cells of my being. And I was feeling that energy permeate into my heart, and into my brain and into my marrow. And it was such a beautiful experience of healing and empowerment. And I realized, like, you couldn't pay me to take any more pills, because the energy and the feeling of well-being that comes from that is something a pharmaceutical could never touch.
Yes. Mm.
Yeah.
Yes. So,
Yeah.
but so I guess there's kind of two places. There's like the multi-orgasmic bliss side, but really it's like, if you get, I always say, just being a sex teacher never interests me, because it it's just like, just that, if that's the goal, that's not really gonna create the change that we're wanting. So it's really, it's soulfulness. It's coming from the heart. Matt Sturm the other day was saying, connecting the heart and the cock together, and and really living in the dominion of yourself. And then that combined with these practices, these sacred sexual practices, what can we see in the world when we are teaching this to our teenage boys?
Right. It's true. If we're practicing those arts of sexual vitality without a strong sense of purpose, or a sense of knowing oneself, or really like a reason, creatively to be channeling that energy, then it's just going to feed into whatever else is really going on. It can expand not so healthy dynamics, just like it could the best kind of vital, amazing dynamics possible. So to be aligned and oriented is important. You're right. I feel exactly the way that you were just describing, and that sense of soul, for me is about, like, how do we channel that energy creatively, and also how do we show up in relationships? Because as well, like, as much as there's this guilt and shame that's carried around all the suffering that the feminine has gone through, men often don't realize the degree to which they can contribute to the healing and the empowerment of the feminine, not just through their words, but how they channel their sexual energy. And it can happen in the context of a sexual relationship with a woman. I mean, like, David Data was the first person to say, fuck her open to God. He won't be the last person to say that either, in some version. But there are modalities like yoni massage that that are being talked about more and more. But it's kind of like, can you imagine if the majority of the relationships in the world who are committed to each other actually had access to these tools? The world would be a completely different place. It really would be. And if people realize the sacred container of relationships, and how, if there is like a soul alignment in our relationships, if we're truly committed to cultivating relationships of containers of safety and abundance of love, then they really can be partnerships whereupon everybody involved holds space for the highest evolution of the other. It really can be. I've felt myself grow so much in my current relationship. I mean, Melly, she's awesome. And she says the same thing. And I've seen this in people who have that container, and who are both committed to their evolution. It's like an engine of creativity and growth when a relationship can be that way. And I'm passionate about spreading that message and holding that space for couples, as well as men and women individually.
Mm-hmm. And I always like to bring in about just same-sex couples.
Correct.
It's really these masculine and feminine energies can also show up for couples who are the same sex.
Absolutely. Yeah. And I did my best to make the book as inclusive as possible, although I admit to being, cisgendered male and all of that, and using heteronormative examples sometimes.
But it is really the key here is we're going in, discovering who we are on a very deep level, knowing ourselves, and then through that understanding that we are sexual beings, cultivating our sexual energy, and then and from there all of our relationships begin to look very different when we have that dominion within. That's my new word.
Absolutely. Absolutely. When you recognize it as that abundance of creative energy, I mean, you know, we like to say, I mean, the sexual energy is going to express itself one way or the other. Are we going to express it consciously or unconsciously? Are we going to do it creatively or destructively? It's a decision.
Right. We had a beautiful, Danielle and I hosted a beautiful sex magic workshop in BC last month or 2 months ago. And yeah, just you can use that energy to create your life. Can you just tell us a little bit about your book? And
you mean like details, logistics, and things?
Not so much about that, but just like what has, like, tell us something about your book that's in it. Tell us a story or something spicy about your book that would make us all want to buy it. I can't wait.
Okay. Gotcha. Yeah. So, so just to say this first, you know, you said it before, it'll come out around Beltane, May 1st on May Day, which is great. You know, emerging yang time of the year, union of the masculine and feminine. It's a wonderful time. So, God, there's so much. I mean, like, there's literally like 300 pages in there. But I tell stories about my clients. I tell my own story. I try to attack this.
Stories about your clients. That's what I'm trying to get to. I want to hear your most healing, transformational stories that you've got about.
Yeah, I'll tell you, like,
practically help somebody's life. Right.
So there's one that's like that I want to tell. It's not explicitly, like, you know, limited to like the sexuality piece though. I mean, there are folks in there who, like, you know, did learn how to become multi-orgasmic. There's folks who, like, you know, learned how to be with their sexual energy before, you know, they could only really like be with another person if they had like dimmed their anxiety through alcohol, and they were able to kick that, like using the methods that I teach, which feels awesome, you know, to help people be more embodied in that way. But the one story that I think is like the most colorful that I tell in there is about a client that I had who's a filmmaker, who was taking it upon himself to challenge himself to direct a musical. And one of the ways that we did that work together was by working with the archetypes described by Douglas and Gillette in the early 90s, the quadrant of the masculine psyche, the king, the warrior, the magician, and the lover, who all represent these different expressions of energy in the masculine soul. And this is one of the ways that I teach people, like, what does that word really mean, the masculine soul? And so this was a person who had a full-time job. He was, you know, making movies on the side, single dad, he had a lot going on. And this in itself was like a part-time job, making this musical. And so he had a really difficult time with it. But by aligning with these archetypes, he could align his energy to be the leader, you know, of this thing as a director. So, you know, using his energy of the warrior to draw certain boundaries and protect certain creative decisions, because otherwise there would be chaos. So he's protecting the boundaries there and the structure of this play, this entity. as the king, embodying the leader and bestowing blessings upon the actors, making a practice of complimenting them and appreciating them in their skills that we have. Because of course, if you're the king on the throne, you have the opportunity to promote the people in your court and bestow blessings upon them, to lift them up. And the energy of the magician, when he says action, bringing to life, like these characters, this plot, this story, weaving these energies together. And the lover, to embellish and to draw upon the color of this experience. And again, there's that piece of appreciating other people there. And so he really was empowered through basically the shamanic work that we did using these archetypal energies and his ability to access them in his life, that he was able to put on this production successfully and get rave reviews while he had all this other stuff going on. And that's his passion, is creating these worlds and inspiring empathy in other people. So he did something that he thought that he could never do, and that he was actually told by an ex-girlfriend, I don't know what to tell you, but you're not a musical theater director. And he proved it to himself that he could do whatever he thought that he could do, which is awesome.
So it's really helping people to contact themselves and live from that place of soul, so they can be of benefit and offer their gifts, their natural gifts and skills to the planet.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Well, thank you so much for coming on, Dr. Dan. We've been trying to connect. Actually, my friend told me last night, he was like, your interviews, you talk too much to the person. It's just a little too lovey. And I was like, oh my God, like, all my friends though. I'll try to be a little less lovey, but I love you. You're amazing. And it's like, we've been trying to get together and chat personally and professionally for the last 2 weeks, and it just hasn't happened. So I'm glad that we finally get to hang out here. And yeah, you're just an amazing, beautiful human and example of a man. And yeah, just so thank you for sharing your wisdom with us. It's so needed right now. This is the time for men, real men, in their real power to rise, and in the way that is just desperately needed on this planet, so deeply.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you, Shezza. And you've been doing a great job with all of this. I could tell it's a lot of work, but you're making it work. And thank you so much for offering this to everybody, because this is super needed. And if anybody who watched this wants to talk to me, I would love to get into contact. I'll leave my Calendly link with Shezza as well if you want to hop on the phone at some point.
Yeah, you can just put it in the links.
Cool. Awesome.
All right. Thank you, love. And we will have that phone call sometime soon.
Yeah. We can wait until after this is all wrapped up.
All right. Bye, love. Lots of love. Mwah.
Cool. Bye-bye.